Ever since I made the Friday the 13th Final Girls ranking video, there's been an outpour of requests for me to do the same thing with all of the franchise's Final Boys. And actually, that's a pretty easy demand for me to supply, since I have a lot to say about some of them. So in this video, we're gonna delve into the history of Friday the 13th's Final Boys, as well as rank all 11 of them from the worst to the best. What is up, Scream Team? Zach Cherry here, and if you're as obsessed with horror movies as I am, you might want to consider hitting that subscribe button and turning on those bell notifications, setting them to all. That way, you can stay up to date with all my latest content. As with all of the Final Girls, I'm just basing these rankings off of who I personally like better as a character. I try to do my best to justify my rationale by offering well thought out arguments that back up my opinions, and as I know there is definitely going to be some controversial placements on this list, I just want to warn you that this video is probably going to incite some contentiousness. But I do want to hear from you. I like to know other people's opinions, and I like to know other people's opinions even better if they can offer a perspective to go along with them. Having said that, toss this video a thumbs up and leave me in the comments down below to let me know how you would rank all 11 Friday the 13th Final Boys. Let's get into it. Coming in last place is Sean Robertson from Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. A graduating student at Lakewood High, Sean accompanied his classmates on a senior field trip to New York City, which was chartered aboard the SS Lazarus, a ship captained by his father, Admiral John Robertson. Amidst pressure from his father to follow in his footsteps as a naval officer, Sean was driven to find a way off of the vessel with his love interest Rennie until he discovered that a stowaway Jason Voorhees had murdered his father along with the rest of the crew, forcing him to step up as the ship's de facto captain. With the navigation and comm systems destroyed, Sean manages to escape with Rennie and a few other survivors on a lifeboat, where he eventually paddles them to the Big Apple, unknowingly with Jason in tow. Once they arrive, the killer continues his unending pursuit of them until only Sean and Rennie remain as they watch Jason melt in a tidal wave of toxic sewage, inexplicably reverting him back to his original child form. There's a laundry list of reasons why Sean is the worst of the lot. Primarily, I think it boils down to the fact that Rennie, the film's final girl, is also really awful, and he essentially enables her delusional fantasies about having been attacked by Jason when she was a child. Which, again, if anyone pays even a modicum of attention to the timeline of these movies, should know that that just could never have happened. But even without being defined by Rennie, Sean is a really crappy character in his own right. He is so passive-aggressive that rather than be mature and tell his father that he doesn't want to be an admiral, he just meekly goes along with it until he messes up and then throws a tantrum. Not to mention that this entire subplot is essentially pointless to the movie and the character, as it doesn't serve to develop him in any way and basically ends as soon as they get off of the ship, with no reference to his father ever again. The only purpose it does serve is to showcase that he feels entitled enough to take control after his father is killed, but can't even do anything effectively, as he just makes terrible decisions, which he also does in the most feeble and whiny manner. In fact, the only point in which he does seem to have any conviction is in his authoritative decision to abandon ship because he believes that all of the other students on board are already dead. Now, whether or not Jason killed those students that Van Dusen told to wait in the restaurant, we will never know. Nor will we ever know if Jason killed the other 50 or so students on board. But what we most certainly do know is that Sean had no way of knowing either. It's actually a very well-known maritime tradition that a captain must go down with the ship, which dictates that a sea captain holds ultimate responsibility for both their ship and everyone embarked on it, and in an emergency will either save those on board or die trying. He did neither of those things, so it was just a very selfish and uninformed decision to bail, which, as far as I'm concerned, puts all of those deaths on him. Oh, and also, he gifts junk jewelry and gets overly maudlin about it when Rennie gets kidnapped. Like, that piece of shrapnel probably cost you $3.50 at a souvenir shop. Get a grip, dude. In 10th place is Sonoran Payton from Jason X, an overachieving protege of Professor Lowe's. Sonoran, along with his android creation KM, who is also his girlfriend, is one of a group of several science students who discover the frozen bodies of Jason Voorhees and Rowan LaFontaine on a routine trip to Earth in the year 2455. Upon bringing them aboard their spaceship, the Grendel, Jason unthaws and begins murdering everyone, at which point Sonoran reprograms KM, upgrading her with martial arts and demolition abilities which allow her to destroy Jason. Seemingly killed, Jason comes back even deadlier than before when he's reanimated as a cyborg, where he incapacitates KM and fractures the Grendel's hull. With the ship minutes away from exploding and Jason in continuous pursuit, the tech-savvy genius tricks him him with a hologram of 1980s Camp Crystal Lake, allowing himself and Rowan enough time to escape, along with KM's detached head, where they fly away to safety as Uber Jason burns up in Earth 2's atmosphere. Like most of Jason X's characters, he's kind of pointless. There's not really much to this guy outside of some snipes and barbs he shares with Janessa, as almost all of his other dialogue is very incidental to the character. Seriously, it just seems like the script is cycling techno jargon from one person to the next, just to give everyone equal footing. So ultimately, he's just a character who's in the movie. One could argue that he is responsible for killing Jason, as he programmed KM to do so, but then I would ask the question, why do we feel the need to take something else away from a woman only to reward it to a man? Even if she is an android, let that be a victory for her. Not to mention the fact that he's mostly protected by KM throughout the movie, and then after she gets her head knocked off, he just becomes a huge liability to everyone as he foolishly attempts to run into danger to salvage her parts. Twice. But I think the thing that discredits his final boy card the most is the fact that he only really survives either out of luck or from other people making themselves the target, especially towards the end of the movie when not one, but two of the film's prominent black characters heroically sacrifice themselves for the greater good. So again, really not a good look for him. In 9th place is Will Rowlands from Freddy vs. Jason. A teenager from Springwood, Ohio, Will dated Laurie Campbell when they were both 14, where after sneaking into her house one night, witnesses Laurie's mother being murdered by Freddy Krueger, who he mistakes for being Laurie's father. In an attempt to erase any mention of that night and the dream killer's name, Will is sent to Weston Hills Psychiatric Hospital, where he's quarantined for 4 long years. After seeing a news report of another murder being committed at Laurie's address, this time by Jason Voorhees, he breaks out with his cellmate Mark, where upon reuniting with Laurie, assists in pulling Freddy out of the dream world so that the razor-gloved killer may face off against Jason at Camp Crystal Lake in hopes that the two horror heavyweights will destroy each other instead. I will say that in terms of all the unlikable characters we have in Freddy vs. Jason, Will is far less offensive than most of them, but I mostly find his role in the movie to be a little too passive. He's just kind of exposition guy, but more so second tier exposition guy, since Mark was the one who had all the facts to begin with. So when he died, Will just kind of started repeating shit he had already heard. Nevertheless, he does astoundingly extrapolate Mark's information into a working theory, but it's so written and inorganic that really I should just blame the movie for how stupid it is. But since Will is a character who is so intrinsically part of this movie rather than being a character who's just in it, my feelings towards him are predicated entirely on how I feel about Freddy vs. Jason as a whole. And spoiler alert, I kind of hate this movie. It may be worth noting that Jason Ritter was initially rejected for the role of Will and only got the part as a very last-minute replacement after the original actor had been fired for drug-related issues. I don't think Ritter did a particularly bad or good job, but from what I understand, director Ronnie Yu reportedly gave almost no cues to any of his cast on the film. This would explain Will's weak characterization, as obviously the lack of direction wouldn't leave the actor with much to work with, and we see this throughout as there are a lot of moments where he's playing off of Monica Keena and just kind of shrugs and half chuckles inappropriately, which is especially awkward when he's telling her about her mother's murder.
It's because I saw your dad kill your mom.
But regardless of all that, I just don't care for Will and Laurie as a couple. He kind of makes her a weaker character by proxy, as she's almost completely defined by her relationship to him, and he becomes very ineffectual during the climax. I think his only real job was to protect her while she was in her dream and then wake her up at the right time, but he pretty much failed at that since he let her arm get burned, which did inadvertently wake her up, so it was serendipitous in that regard, but it's just another example of a final boy surviving by circumstances outside of his control rather than surviving through his own tenacity. In 8th place is Tommy Jarvis 3.0 from Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. Still haunted by the memory of killing Jason years earlier, Tommy travels to the cemetery where Jason is buried so that he can dig him up and cremate his corpse in a vain attempt to keep him from ever coming back to life. Instead, Jason is reanimated by lightning, where he sets off on another killing spree headed for the newly reopened campground, which which has just unloaded a bus full of kids. Tommy tries to warn the local authorities to no avail and instead gets help from the sheriff's daughter Megan, where the two lure Jason into the lake where he originally drowned in hopes of keeping him anchored down there for good. One of the most popular opinions I've seen within the Friday the 13th fan community is that Thom Mathews is the best version of Tommy Jarvis, period. And honestly, I have no idea why that is. Nobody ever really backs up this claim with a supporting argument. It's just kind of stated as gospel. I mean, I'm assuming people are saying he's the best version because he's tall. It's because he's tall, right? Obviously, I respect your opinion if you feel differently, and this comes with no offense to Thom Mathews, but I personally find his version of Tommy to be completely superficial. Firstly, the characterization is way too far off. I mean, Tommy is, for all intents and purposes, an outsider. That's how he was originally introduced to us. He is not a cool kid, and Thom Mathews is considerably too cool to be playing this character. They basically took Tommy and gave him a she is all that makeover. They removed his glasses, made him hot, but then they forgot to write him as Tommy. So all throughout the movie, the script panders to us by constantly repeating exposition about his troubled past so that, you know, we don't forget that it's still the same kid from the last two movies. And despite all of that, I might have still erred more favorably towards him if not for the fact that he is one of the most frustrating characters in the entire franchise. Just as a few examples, he is directly responsible for every single death, not only in this movie, but also throughout the rest of the regular timeline. Of course, never faces any recrimination or reprimand for that either. Very similar to Rennie after killing Van Dusen. If you want to consider part 5 to be canon, which I do, the entire grave digging scenario was portended to him in a nightmare, so really he has no excuse for being surprised by the turn of events here, as it was all foretold to him. Also, he's just constantly running around in circles with the sheriff, with the outcome being exactly the same every time. He never learns from his mistakes, displays no common sense, and makes these irrational knee-jerk decisions. I don't know, maybe people find that charming, I just find it stifles the plot. As I already mentioned in the final girl rankings, he has no chemistry with Megan, and also, what is his plan? What was going on with those books on the occult? We never get to see the wheels turning or understand the mental or emotional process of this Tommy. But because I don't want this to be entirely negative, I will say that his final confrontation with Jason is very iconic. One of the more memorable set pieces of the franchise. That's all I got though. In 7th place is Tommy Jarvis 2.0 from Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. 5 years after killing Jason Voorhees and being institutionalized, Tommy is released to Pinehurst Youth Development Center, a halfway house for rehabilitated teens located near Crystal Lake. On the same day that he arrives, a fellow resident, Joey Burns, is murdered by another resident in a fit of rage, an event which precipitates a string of mysterious murders being committed all around town. Believed to be Jason Voorhees back from the dead, the killer makes their way to Pinehurst, where they take out all the staff and teens, leaving only Pam Roberts, Reggie Winter, and Tommy, who had suspiciously disappeared earlier in the night. After a long chase scene that leads them to a barn, Tommy reappears where he's able to defeat the killer, who's revealed to actually be Joey's father and local paramedic Roy Burns, who was avenging the murder of his son using Jason's likeness as a cover. With the night of horror seemingly over, Tommy appears to suffer a psychotic breakdown of his own, as we last see him wearing Roy's mask and brandishing a kitchen knife as he sneaks up behind Pam. So this time played by John Shepard, I like to refer to this as the sweaty Tommy. I can't say I particularly care for this iteration of the character all that much either, but I can at least appreciate that there was some effort made to keep as much connective tissue between the films as possible. We see that this is very much the same kid from the last movie. He's still got his collection of masks that he made. He's got the photo of his mom and sister. I don't have to suspend disbelief to buy that this is Tommy. One of the most fundamental rules of screenwriting is show don't tell, and this film at least understands that with Tommy, as we literally watch his mental unraveling. That's not to say that it was particularly well handled, but compared to Jason Lives, which was all tell and no show, A New Beginning at least attempts to build an emotional emotional connection between its Tommy and the viewer. In terms of John Shepherd's performance, I think he does a pretty decent job with the material he has to work with. He had actually done extensive research for the role by taking a job working at a state mental hospital, and a lot of the other cast members even recalled that he was very standoffish on set, so it seems like he took a very method approach to this performance, which I respect. Where this Tommy loses points is in the fact that he disappears for a big chunk of the movie. He only has 24 lines in the whole thing. He's also one of 3 people to survive, so it's hard to really classify this as his film, especially given that he has the most understated screen presence of the 3. Every time I watch this, I actually forget how the climax plays out, because I'm never sure if it was him, Reggie, or Pam who ultimately defeated Roy, since they all pretty much take turns delivering blows. But despite all of that, I do think there's a certain novelty to this version of the character, which is especially highlighted during his over-the-top fight scenes, as they're kind of my favorite thing about him. I just wish that they had given him more to do here. In 6th place is Stephen Freeman from Jason Goes to Hell. Following the apparent death of Jason Voorhees by an FBI task force, Stephen learned that he was the baby daddy of the late killer's great niece. Yes, you heard that right. And discovered that Jason's soul would continue to live on and possess people until he was reborn through somebody belonging to his own bloodline. After being accused of murdering his ex-girlfriend's mother, Stephen becomes a fugitive from the law and has to find a way to make the town believe that Jason is still alive. With the help of a mysterious bounty hunter, he's able to assist Jessica Kimball in sending Jason to hell and reunites with his family as they walk off into the sunrise, happily ever after. This is a classic case of a good final boy being stuck in a terrible Friday the 13th movie, because I actually think he's one of the better aspects of the film. Originally, this was supposed to be Tommy Jarvis coming back yet again, but since New Line didn't own the rights to the character, he ended up being a unique role to this entry instead, which I think if it weren't such a convoluted mess with an uneven narrative, he would probably get a lot more respect from the fandom, which he's totally deserving of, by the way, since John D. LeMay, who plays Stephen, had previously starred as the main character in the Friday the 13th television series. I really like his aesthetic. I mean, who else can rock a Letterman jacket with Bubbles glasses from Trailer Park Boys? He's kind of a badass too, always surprising us with some sort of new trick. Ultimately, I think he's underrated because if you consider what he has to deal with, he is tasked with one of the most difficult missions of any final person in this franchise, by having to convince everyone that whatever the hell it is that's happening in this movie is actually happening. And considering that this movie can barely make sense of its own premise, he really has his work cut out for him. Not to mention, he's also very capable in battle, as we see he puts up quite a fight, whether that be against someone possessed by Jason or against Jason himself. Most people would be dead within seconds, but he can go toe-to-toe with him and hold his own. Also, I think that he has a very noble cause, with his motivation rooted in proving himself as a family man. It's just too bad that his girlfriend sucks, because she does not deserve his level of commitment. In 5th place is Nick Rogers from Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. Attending his cousin Michael's surprise birthday party at a cabin on Crystal Lake, Nick meets and develops an attraction to neighbor Tina Shepard, unaware that she possesses telekinetic abilities, which have also led to Jason's resurrection. After Michael never shows up to the party, Tina informs Nick that she had a vision of his murder at the hands of Jason, causing Nick to go searching for him in the woods. However, as the corpseified killer makes his way through all of the party guests, as well as Tina's mom and psychiatrist, Tina and Nick become the only ones left, at which point she unleashes her powers against the monster in order to banish him back to a watery grave. Whenever the subject of Tina and Nick comes up, I always hear people say that they don't have any chemistry, and it seems a lot of that is predicated on the fact that Kevin Spirtas, who plays Nick, is an openly gay actor, and that he and Lar Park Lincoln did not get along well on set. But personally, I don't find their chemistry to be any worse than any of the previously mentioned couples. I actually find this character to be very endearing for how completely smitten he is with Tina, despite barely knowing her outside of their little meet cute. And I love how he sheepishly introduces her to his friends, as if he's bringing his fiancée home to meet the parents for the first time. I thought it was also a really sweet gesture when he returned Tina's shirt to her all washed and folded. He's just a very polite and supportive all-American boy next door, who at the first sign of trouble thinks of the well-being of others. Also, despite his attraction to Tina, Tina, he isn't completely defined by it, as we actually see throughout the movie he's more so concerned with his cousin's whereabouts. I think if it were not for him being handcuffed to Tina or overshadowed by her powers, he would make for a very admirable final boy in any horror film, just based off of his virtues and sensibilities. Even if the character of Tina didn't exist in the New Blood and it was just a final boy situation, I could still see him being a worthy sole survivor against Jason. And not that I ever base any of these rankings on looks in any way at all, but I will say that I think Nick is the most handsome of the lot. In fourth place is Paul Holt from Friday the 13th Part 2. As a dedicated outdoorsman, Paul opened the Packanack Lodge training facility on Crystal Lake, where he would bestow his skills upon prospective new counselors who were vying for summer camp jobs in the local area. Being in very close proximity to where the original massacre had taken place, he reluctantly works with the sheriff's department in order to keep trespassers off of the condemned property by warning his staff and trainees about the legend of Jason, unaware that the killer actually still lurks the grounds. On a night out at a local pub with his girlfriend and assistant, Ginny Field, he discredits her belief that Jason is still alive, and upon returning back to the camp, discovers everyone has been killed, where he himself is then attacked and knocked out. After coming to, he manages to find Jason's shack deep in the woods, where he wrestles with the killer some more before Ginny strikes down the sack-headed scoundrel with a machete, at which point the two leave him for dead as they go looking for help. Later that night, Ginny has a nightmare in which Jason attacks her once more, only to wake up the following morning as she's being loaded into an ambulance, frantically wondering where Paul has gone. Paul is like the Skip Robinson of the Friday the 13th franchise. You know, he's out here with his half-buttoned flannel shirts and 70s porn star hair. He has this really dry sense of humor that I love, whether it's him teasing Ginny about her menstrual cycle with the message in the mirror, or being sarcastic towards Deputy Winslow.
Ginny?
Yes, Paul.
No seconds on dessert for Jeff and Sandra tonight?
It's just one of those little touches that gives him an extra dimension of character. I also love that he's a cool boss and literally does not give a shit about the kids smoking weed or other trivial things, but does still err on the side of professionalism, especially concerning his own relationship with Ginny, which he keeps on the DL. Speaking of which, I think he has the best chemistry with a final girl in this franchise. None of these other couples come even close as far as I'm concerned, as his repartee with Ginny just works so well. I enjoy how she's constantly cutting down his overly self-assuredness because he is super cocky, but it's one of those things where if John Furey and Amy Steele weren't as capable of actors as they are, it could have easily backfired and made either one of their characters come off as very unlikable. Paul also delivers what I believe to be the definitive Legend of Jason monologue. It was just a really great scene, and I love that it was reused for the final chapter. I'm sure there are some people who will question whether Paul should actually be on this list, as the ending of the movie does leave his fate pretty ambiguous, but since there's no tangible proof to suggest that he was killed, and the news report at the beginning of Part 3 doesn't count him among the dead, most people take that to mean that he had already been put into another ambulance or was still being tended to in the cabin. Either way, for this list, I'm choosing to believe he survived. In third place is Clay Miller from Friday the 13th, 2009. In the wake of his sister Whitney's disappearance and the authorities ruling her out to be a runaway, Clay embarks on his own search and rescue mission after she fails to show up to their mother's funeral. Returning to Crystal Lake, he teams up with a girl named Jenna, who's staying with a group of friends in the area, who were all picked off by Jason Voorhees, who, as it turns out, has been dwelling in a series of tunnels underneath the old camp, where he's also holding Whitney as his prisoner. After Clay and Jenna discover and free Whitney, Jason pursues them through his lair, killing Jenna and cornering the sibling duo in an old barn, where teaming together, they're able to kill him using a wood chipper, after which they dump his body into the lake. This is not the first time Jared Padalecki has been in a horror remake, as he had already appeared in House of Wax a few years earlier, and I have to say that he does a much better job here. Obviously, Clay is a reimagining of Rob Dyer from the final chapter, so it was nice to see a more fleshed out version of that character, but that's not to say that his story arc is without issue, as the biggest problem from what I can tell is that for a large chunk of the movie, he doesn't really have a plan. He's just kind of wandering aimlessly until he happens upon Jason by accident, which does, for the most part, make it feel like the events of the movie could be happening pretty much the exact same with or without him. One thing they could have changed in order to give his story a little more direction would be to have him, much like Rob, already be aware of who Jason is is and be on a mission to hunt him down. But even if they didn't go that route, there was a scene that could have served as a pivotal turning point for his character. And that's when he goes to the old woman's house and she basically plants the seed by alluding to Jason's existence, which does pique his interest, but then his curiosity doesn't go anywhere beyond that, and he never follows through with this as he just continues going from door to door to hand out flyers. So they didn't really capitalize off of the potentiality there. Otherwise, I think that Jared Padalecki serves as a very strong lead here, which makes Clay stand out as one of the more capable final boys of the franchise. In second place is Reginald Winter, aka Reggie the Reckless, from Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. The grandson of George Winter, Pinehurst's resident cook, Reggie lived with him at the halfway house, where he met and bonded with Tommy Jarvis, after being impressed by his home-crafted collection of latex masks. After receiving word that his older, troublemaking brother Demon would be in town, Reggie gets Pam Roberts to drive him to a nearby trailer park to visit him, with Tommy reluctantly coming along for the ride. The reunion is cut short, however, when Tommy gets into a fight with a local and runs off into the woods, leaving Pam to drop Reggie back off at Pinehurst, unaware that a Jason Voorhees copycat has been picking the staff and residents off throughout the night. Reggie, who had been sleeping during the murders, wakes up and finds everyone dead and is chased around the property by the killer, along with Pam, who had also just returned after having car problems while out looking for the missing kids. After getting away, he's able to strike the imposter down with a tractor, at which point Tommy eventually resurfaces and helps them defeat and unmask the maniac, drawing their night of terror to a close. Again, this is a case of a great final boy being in a not so great Friday the 13th film, although admittedly this chapter has grown on me quite a bit. What I love most about Reggie is his bravado, especially when he introduces Pam as his girlfriend. Typically, I'm not a fan of children in horror movies because they always pull focus and can rarely act, which might be a contributing factor for why Part 6 doesn't land for me, since none of those kids feel like real people. But when this franchise gets its child characters right, they knock it out of the park, because Reggie is so unapologetically a 12-year-old boy that he feels like an authentic transplant here, and Shavar Ross, for his part, is clearly the MVP of A New Beginning. I do wish that they had established a clearer connection between him and Tommy, as you can tell that they laid the groundwork for it but then didn't really follow through. I would consider Reggie's purpose in the screenplay to act as a mirror of Tommy's younger self, or at least the childhood that Jason had stolen from him, especially considering where Reggie ends up by the end with his brother and grandfather being killed. But the finished movie mostly ignores this parallel, which is sad because that perspective could have been the missing link here, which also would have elevated John Shepard's version of Tommy. In any event, I'm kind of glad they didn't go the original proposed route for Part 6, which would have seen Reggie return, where we find him as Tommy's roommate in an institution, only to get killed immediately by Jason, who comes back to life. I would never want to see Reggie get the Newt Alien 3 treatment, so I'm glad he only exists in this movie, but otherwise, he's got the most personality of anyone on this list. And finally, you knew this was coming because landing at the top of this list is going to be Tommy Jarvis from Friday the 13th, the final chapter. After the separation of his parents, Tommy and his older sister Trish went to live with their mother on Crystal Lake, where as a reclusive loner, he spent his time building masks and playing video games. His idyllic summer comes crashing to a halt, however, after Jason returns to the area to continue his reign of terror, where he kills Tommy's mother as well as a group of teens who had rented out the house next door. With only himself and Trish remaining, Tommy delves into the psyche of his feral foe by shaving his head and channeling the essence of the little boy Jason once was. With the killer's guard momentarily lowered, Tommy swings a machete into the side of his head before continuing to chop him into messes, finally destroying the maniac for real. In the end, Tommy and Trish barely escape with their lives, but it comes at the expense of his innocence, as the trauma of the brutal attack has left him with deep psychological scars which he may never recover from. Tommy is my favorite final boy of the franchise because he represents, for me at least, a time in my life where I was not only first discovering the horror genre, but also realizing how important it was for me to cope with the daily horrors of adolescence. Similar to Tommy, I could identify with expressing myself through creative endeavors, which is something I still do, clearly, with my YouTube channel, but also from a need to connect with people through those interests. As we see, Tommy meets this stranger and wants nothing more than to show him his world and receive validation for something that he loves, if only for a moment, because that's kind of his friendship love language. It's something that adds a very human element to this character, and I think that we can all identify with that in one way or another. It's also a very subtle way for the movie to connect Tommy to Jason, as there are a lot of parallels between the two characters. They're both outsiders, they both don't have strong father figures, they both lose their mothers. Jason is Tommy's shadow self. He's the path Tommy hasn't taken, or the thing he could become, which is touched upon here when Tommy has to go to a very dark place in order to defeat Jason, as we see he has the ability to understand and have empathy for him. It all goes towards making his defeat of Jason very symbolic. Of course, I think there could have been a clearer path to get there, such as making Tommy a physically deformed boy himself. And as one last thing, he had the common sense to make sure Jason really was dead, where most final people would have called it a day. So I consider that to be the cherry on top of everything else that cements his status as the true champion of this list. Anyway, that's my ranking, at least based on my current feelings. I want to thank my Patreon supporter Maxime Rivas. If you guys want to see even more Friday the 13th related content, my channel's got tons of it. You can check out this playlist right now. Until next time, I've been Zach Cherry, and I'll be right back.